Out Brent with this article called A Complete Chronology of the Israelites in Egypt, a textual study of the length of the sojourn of the Seventh-day Adventist perspective by Bronson. I found it and downloaded it last night. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of good academic work, from downloadable for free. Especially I've found a lot on timelines and
Just
on
gonna make a comment about it.
on how they come together and
before they go online.
Okay, Brent, before we go online, can I make a comment about your
It's already online.
Oh, well, picture the Ark of the Covenant. It bugs me because in scriptures, it says that the poles are on the sides of the ark,
right.
and you have them on the front and the back.
I need to get a good picture. If you can find one, let me know.
There are a few, I found a few online. They're harder to find.
Well, just email Sandy and then she can send it to me.
If,
I have
okay,
no
if
problem. I looked, and the key thing to
I've
me
got
was
several pictures.
yeah.
do
The key
you?
thing to me was the cherubim and the make sure it had a gold fringe.
Yeah, you got to
around
have the rest
outside.
of it too.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, to have that right. Yeah, to find the right pictures, not easy.
Yeah,
Well, when Ron Wyatt found it, he said the terebinths, they're standing at the ends of them. Mrs. White says the same thing.
Well, part of doing a book is I can get a graphic artist just to make me the design I want.
That's
what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's right. Yeah.
So I tried finding it online and I looked, and I mean, the hardest one to find, and I haven't really even found it yet. I had to make my own little cheesy one, is the arrangement of the boards in the tabernacle, because there's 46 boards, there's two connecting boards, so there's 48, but the interior is 10 by 10. And so the way they have them set up, if you look at 99% of them, it's the interior is only 9. And they have these connecting boards on the outside, but if they're arranged the way that I've shown you a few times, it's perfect. There's no the two boards become the cornerstone of everything, but it's in the interior it's 10 by 10. In the exterior, it's like a little longer, but that's the outside, so if you measured the total inside, you'd have 70 cubits, and the total outside you'd be 72, so anyway, long story short is that yeah, those are the type of things that when you're doing a book, you can create your own, graphics and charts. These things I do online for these PowerPoints, I just make them myself, and do them up, so they're not, they're just for explanation purposes, but they're not great,
Right. Yeah.
but there's a lot of good resources where people, you can go and I can hand them my chart and say, I need this done professionally into for a book, and I can get it done. So anyway, what time we got? No, it's 10 o'clock, right?
Yes.
So are we ready?
Yeah.
Are we ready to start?
Yes.
Okay, and we're on right now?
That's what she said. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go here. So welcome everybody. This week is Saturday, February 24th, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and this is the next in the series of the Covenant Code. We're taking a little bit of a departure today, where we're going to take a little bit more time to study some of the things that we've seen and kind of make sure that we understand some of the numbers and things, so we don't rush too far and lose everybody. As we get into the next steps, we're going to need to understand these numbers a little bit better. So I want to take the time, a little bit of a Q&A, where I can stop for some questions and things like that as well. But what I want to, what we've talked about, we've done several in this series so far, and we've seen both the testimony from the Bible and we've also seen the opposing testimony. So we've talked a little bit about the theory of evolution and about the the Bible criticism in terms of when it was written and who wrote it. So, but and we even talked about timelines, and and we talked about why there's different opinions on the timeline. Was it 4,000 years till from Adam to Jesus? Was it 4,004, 4140? And I've said all along that the tabernacle itself predicts those timelines, even if you had no other timeline. And I want to show you something kind of like I want to imagine that we're going. So, what is the covenant code? Well, the covenant was entered into by Adam, and the covenant was entered into after Adam and Eve had already fallen. And the covenant, God promised that He would send His anointed to reverse the outcome of for Adam and Eve and destroy the deceiver and make a path for their redemption and for all men. And we'll get into a little more later and hopefully today maybe, but it's a covenant. It's a law. It's a special type of law where the stronger is obliged to try and help the weaker if they're having a hard time fulfilling their covenant. So it's like a marriage, where in sickness and health and weaker and stronger. In a covenant law, the stronger is obliged to try and help the weaker fulfill their end of the covenant if that they're interested in remaining in the covenant. And so through Jesus, we're able to fulfill the covenant. God made an appropriation for us that in spite of our sins, in spite of our backslidings, in spite of our disbelief, that we would share something. And in sharing this one thing, we would have atonement. We would have reconciliation with God. And the one thing was the love that God had for His Son, who sacrificed voluntarily His life for redemption of our sins, that we would value that life and that Son the same way that God values that life and that Son. And through Jesus' love for the Father and His love for us, He went to that cross. So our atonement comes from accepting and believing and having value for that act by God's Son. And now atonement really means like at one. Now we're at one with God. We were separated from God, but now we're at one with God because He fulfilled His covenant and He made the appropriation for us to be returned and redeemed, to God. So when Moses formalized this covenant, and when written word became whole sentences and not just little graphics or whatever, this was written down, and this portion the book of Genesis was the first book of Moses. The other four books, beginning with Exodus, is where this covenant comes in. And that's where it's formalized, and that's where this pattern comes in. This pattern is given to Moses saying, don't deviate from it, the tabernacle pattern. And it all has to do with the covenant. It's all a picture of the covenant. And so we, in our generation, have been asked in the book of Revelation to go back and study this pattern and study everything about it and the people that worship there and all of the ordinances. And so we started to do that. And so we're really studying this covenant code. But I want to pretend for right now that we're in the year 25875 from Adam. So I'm just going to get a little pointer here. So here's Adam to the flood is 1656 years. Then 93 and a half years later is here, which is the birth of Moses. So we don't know anything else. We just know what Moses was given and what he was told did not deviate at all from this pattern. And so he was given the dimensions for the Ark of the very first thing given is the Ark of the Covenant and its mercy seat. So he was given the dimensions for that. And when you look at those dimensions, the breadth of it was 1.5, the length of it was 2.5, and the height of it was 1.5. So I wanted to show that these were given in this dimension way back here. Didn't have anything to do with what came after him, the rest of his life, the Exodus, all this sort of stuff, the patriarchs, the prophets, Elijah, all the way to Jesus. We're talking about we're just here. So we have these dimensions that Moses claimed were given to him by God, and for him not to deviate at all from that pattern. So if we multiply them out, for example, 1.5 times 2.5 is 3.75, and then that times 1.5 is 5.625. You could also say 1.5 times 1.5 times, which equals 2.25 times 2.5, but it still equals the same number. You're going to have these numbers. You're going to have 1.5, 2.5, 3.75, 5.625, and you may have 2.25. So these are the numbers that come out of this, where you're multiplying the length by the breadth by whatever. They were given, and Moses had that. So we've looked at up until this point in time, we looked at Adam, we looked at Enoch, the seventh generation, the one that God took without seeing death. We looked at the time from Enoch to Noah. We looked at the time from Noah to Moses. We looked at the time from Moses to Elijah, from Elijah to Jesus, and we've made these observations. And the way we've done it up until now is that we're taking this pattern of 1.5 times 2.5 was what we mostly focused on because of the first dimensions given, and that is the dimension for the mercy seat. The mercy seat doesn't have a height dimension, just a breadth and a length. The only height dimension given is for the ark in general. So long story short is that we've looked at this and we've noticed that everything about this first time period, this time, the 1656 years from Adam to the ark, that in the next period from the ark to Jesus is exactly 1.5 times the ark. So in other words, 1656 times 1.5 was 2484. And then we noticed, even when you look at the Enoch, 621 years passed before he's born. Then the second timeline, it's 931 and a half years before Moses is born. And that's also 621 times 1.5 is 931.5. Then this timeline between Enoch and Noah is 1,035 years. Well, 1,035 years times 1.5 is 1,552.5 years. So the same timeline between Moses and Jesus. So this is times 1.5, this is times 1.5. Then we looked at the 2.5 and said, okay, this timeline of 1656 times 2.5 equals the total length of 4,140 years from Adam to Jesus, exactly. So 1656 times 2.5 is 4,140 years. And we, went into some of the same things with the 2.5 for these numbers, but you get the idea. So we've looked at going forward numbers, this number times 1.5, this number times 2.5. But Moses wouldn't have known that at that timeline because these other things weren't filled in yet. So he wouldn't have known it'd be exactly 1552 years till Jesus, or how many years to Elijah. He would just know up until that time. But he would have these numbers, 1.5, and he'd be able to look and see these numbers before him. But so I'm just pointing out that the numbers we're looking at are directly in the Bible in a pattern that Moses claimed was from God, that the disciples confirmed was from God, and that Jesus came in direct accord to that pattern. So that's what we have up until this time. So now, what else did Moses have? Well, he wrote the genealogy. The first book was Genesis. And so he had this timeline. And so we can dispute other timelines of 4,000 years, 4,100 years, 600. But this we can't really dispute. It's already written. And so we just look at it. Adam to Seth, 130 years. And have the numbers off to the side here, the total timeline. So plus 130 is 130, plus 105 is 235, and you can keep going down, and you get to Moses being born, and here's so all this genealogy is in Genesis 5, but then it starts to talk about the flood in Genesis 7.6, and that's where it says it was the 600th year of Noah's life. So you add the 600 to the 1056 of his birth, and you get 1656. So certainly Moses was aware of these numbers because he's the one who recorded them in this book. So Moses is aware of the ark numbers, and he's aware of these numbers. So let's just look at that's all we knew. We didn't know anything else but this number, and we knew. Now we also know not just the numbers, but that each of the furnishing and everything about that tabernacle, each of the holy days, has a very specific description of what it means, of why it's at that time. So every holy day is to memorialize an event that God, from God in the redemption of man. And it also is a predictor of a future event. It's like a rehearsal. This is what happened now. Memorialize this number because this number predicts the future of a similar final event. So, we have a lot of information it's chapter after chapter, page after page about each one of these things. We're just talking before we went live about, everything from the the soft materials, what the priest was supposed to wear, everything is described, and it's all beneficial. It's all something that we're going to look at and you'd be blown away by how it predicts the events that came. But so basically Moses, observes this pattern exactly as is given to it. God promises him that once it's been observed exactly as given, that he will again dwell with his people. And so he has this timeline, he has the arc dimensions, and we're just going to kind of take that little step. And one of the first observations we made was, how do we observe time? So we observe time by the 360-degree rotation of the Earth. So every hour, the Earth rotates 15 degrees. So 1 hour is 15 degrees, 2 hours is 30 degrees, 3 hours is 45, all the way around. So 12 hours is 180 degrees, 18 hours is 270 degrees, 24 hours is 360 degrees. Now, if we take that 1656 that we just looked at, and that 2484. So let's just go back here for a second. Go back one more. So the 1656 years from Adam to Noah, and then the 2480 years from the ark to Jesus. So if we take how we observe time, well, 16.56 hours is exactly 69% of the rotation. So 16.56 hours. And when does that happen? It's exactly 248.4 degrees. So when you take these degrees, every hour being 15, and you get to 16.56 hours. That's 69% of a day, of a 24-hour day. That's 69% of this rotation. And that occurs exactly 248.4 degrees. So if you're looking down from heaven on the earth, you see the whole rotation. You know that the rotation is 360 degrees, and so that's how man learned to measure time. That's a Babylonian system, and we're going to get into that in a second. But that's how we observed to measure time. So that was just an observation that how we measure time appears to be directly related to the events that happened through biblical history. But now we're going to take a look at something for the first time. Here's that same chart. And all I'm going to do is take the 1656 as minutes. And I'm going to take all these arc dimensions. And I'm going to, rather than going forward, going 1.5, 2.5, 2.25, 3 point, I'm going to go that we only knew this one day, the 1656, because that's what we know that Moses knew, 1656. I'm going to go 0.15. So let's just drop that one. 1656 minutes times 0.15 equals 248.4 minutes. Okay, remember we're looking at 60, 20.4. Well, 248.4 minutes, divided by 60 is 4.14 hours. How much is this timeline? 4,140. And how many degrees would 4.14 hours be? Every hour is 15 degrees. Times 15 degrees is 62.1 degrees. So see how these numbers all came up just by going 0.15? Now let's go 0.225. So if I take 1.5 times 1.5, I get 2.25. Same number, 1656 minutes times 0.225 equals 372.6 minutes. I divide that by 60 minutes in an hour, and that's 6.21 hours. And 6.21 hours times 15 degrees is 93.15 degrees. So 6.21 hours occurs exactly at 93.15 degree rotation. Now let's go 2.5, because that's another dimension length, 2.5. Well, 1656 times 0.25 is 414 minutes. 414 minutes divided by 60 minutes in an hour is 6.9 hours. Remember, I kept saying 6.9. Next tick of the clock is the 7th. Okay, so 414. And how many degrees is that? Times 15 degrees, 103.5 degrees. So 100.35 degrees in a rotation is 6.9 hours, and that is 414 minutes. Well, what's this number here? 1035. Now let's go 375. So 1.5 times 2.5 is 375. 1656 minutes times 0.375 is 621 minutes. Divided by 60 is 10.35 hours. 621, 1035. Times 15 degrees is 155.25 degrees. It happens at exactly 15525. 15525. 1656 minutes times 5.625. Well, where's that? That's the number I showed you earlier. 1.5 times 2.5 times 1.5 is 5625. So 0.5625 of 1656 is 931.5 minutes. Divide that by 60, it's 15.525 hours. Again, all these numbers just came up by taking the one number we know, 1656, taking and looking at it as if it's all one day, taking the dimensions here and seeing incredibly that they're all related. They all happen at a very specific time, and you can't change that. That's just the truth. That's math. And if you look at the way the Earth rotates, so if I'm going, we're going to walk through this a little bit, but let's just take the first one, 0.15. We said that's 4.14 hours. That's 62.1 degrees. So if we just go back again and just kind of walk through this. So 4.14 hours would be somewhere right around here, and 62.1 degrees. That's just the fact. The Earth's rotating, and at this specific time, is 0.15 of the other time, of a greater time, So when we look at these numbers, so that's looking at the arc numbers. Now I want to look at something else. So when you'll see that, let's move this over here. So this 4,140 years, this first period, the 1656, is 0.4 of that time. And 0.4 times 2.5 equals 1. So this is 0.4 of the time comes to here, 0.6 of the time comes to here. So this 2,484 years is 0.6 of 4140. The 1656 years is 0.4. So when I look at 1656 times 0.6, if we're looking just at, the number that we knew, 1656 times 0.6, that equals 16.56 hours. And times 1.5 is 24.84 degrees. If I look at 0.4, what's 0.4 hours? 0.4 hours is 662.4 divided by 60 is 11.04 hours times 15 degrees is 165.6 degrees. So that occurs right at, so that's, and when you add those together, you add up 0.6 and 0.4 is adding up, then you get 4140 from the 2484. Sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of this little thing. 2484, 2248.4 and 165.6 equals 414 degrees. Well, 414 degrees is a little more than 360, right? You go 360, and in fact, it's 1.15 times 360. So 41. So if I take 4140 times 0.6 is 2484, times 0.4 is 1656. But 1656 minutes, there's 1440 minutes in a day. So 1656 divided by 1440 is 1.15. So it's 1.15 more than a day when the flood happens, when these judgment events happen. Well, guess what? 6.9 divided by 6 is 1.15. So in other words, in a day, 4 times 6 is 24. So 24 hours, but 1.15 of that, so in other words, 1656 is 1.15 of 1440. It's 27.6 hours. That's 1.15 more than 24 hours. And so when we're looking at these days, you have to remember that, or these millenniums, 1,000 years. So someone said, oh, it's the 4,000 years or 3,000 years. Anything from 0 to 999 is the first 1,000 years. Anything from 1,001, so if you have 1,100, 1,200, that's part of the second millennium. That's part of the 2,000 or the second day, or anything over 24 hours is part of the second day. But it's the first day is over. The 6 is over. 24 times 6 is 24. Or 6 times 4 is 24. But so you look at these everything we went through here, and you realize that, because this is the timeline, 1656 years from Adam to the flood. You can't change that. You can't say, oh, well, I wish it was exactly 1,440 years to be exactly 6, exactly a day. It's there for a reason. The flood happened, and the reason, the difference between 1440 and 1656 is the same difference between 6 and 6.9. And the clock strikes as soon as the 6.9 is over. Well, why? What was Noah's name was rest. And it was like, enter my rest. The Sabbath is a rest. Well, what's the Sabbath? The seventh. So as soon as the 6.9 is over, that is the seventh. When 6.9 happens, the next tick on the clock is the seventh. All of these things happen at 6.9. Boom. Next tick of clock. But we also looked at something very unusual, or very interesting. 69 observed years is also equal exactly to 70 prophetic years. So that's 70 360-day years is the same as 69 365-day years. So what I'm saying is that none of these things we have to guess at. When someone says, "Oh, well, it's this timeline or that time," this model predicts these events exactly, and it predicts. So the fact that I showed you a timeline earlier on that exactly shows 4,140 years to here, and that timeline is accepted by the majority of scholars today, and so what's the meaning of all this? Well, this is God's covenant. This pattern was given, of these events and of these things to happen. This atonement pattern was 1.5 times 2.5, when the blood on the mercy seat would be, would be put on the mercy seat, and that event would happen. And it was put on top of the ark. Well, we looked at the ark, we looked at 1.5, we looked at 2.5, and that's when that event literally happened. Because all of these things are pointing us to who is the anointed one, who is the Messiah. He would have to come at this time. He would, he would have to perform these things. He would have to perform this sacrifice. He would have to fulfill all of these things. And it's to give us a picture. This is, whether if you're able to accept it, prophecy is supernatural. God said, declaring the end from the beginning. It can't be done in a natural way. It's supernatural. And God said to Moses, yeah, I'm giving you all these signs and wonders to do. Moses said, well, how will the next generation know, that a prophet was sent? Well, by prophecy, by foretelling the future in advance through the same prophet that did these miracles. Then, then you'll know, the next generations will know that he surely was a prophet. He surely was sent by God. So, we take a deeper dive. Now we're not going forward with these like times 1.5 times. We're taking these as all a percentage of that same timeline, and we know that, for example, 621 years passed before the seventh generation, which was Enoch, and we learn that the seventh generation, God, walked with God. God took that generation, Enoch. Well, what about the sixth generation? And we studied that out a little bit before, which was, in these tabernacle boards, the oops, sorry, I moved this thing. There's 46 boards. Before we got on, I was talking about how these corner boards work into that, but 46 boards. Remember back here, let me just go back one. I can. Over here, yeah, right here. Remember I said the 0.6 and the 0.4, and the 0.4 was 1104 hours, and that happened at 165.6 degrees. Well, that's 0.4 of 1656. But of 1440, that same number is 0.46, because it's this number is 1.15 more. 46 is 1.15 more than 4. So when you go back over here where we were a second ago, so we notice that there's 46 boards, and that each board is 1.5 wide. 46 times 1.5 is 6.69. Times 1.5 is 1035. Times 2.5 is 1.4 hours. Times 375 is 2.5875 days, which is when Moses was born. We compared the 69 to the 70, comparing prophetic years observed, and we have the same thing. So these boards represented the generations. The sixth generation was born 460 years from Adam. Enoch's father was born, Jared was born 460 from Adam. So the sixth generation was 460. The seventh generation was 621. But when you look at these generations, as we go through these numbers, trying not to be confusing here, trying to just be straightforward, we're just observing time and what the pattern shows, and then what happened, and everything appears to happen at the same time, and we don't have to guess. Well, what is the pattern? What is the number? We know it. It's 1.5 times 2.5 times 1.5. It's already given. The length, the breadth, the height. Then what are the events? They're already given. Day of Atonement, Passover, trumpets, um, tabernacles. And you just understand what those events are, and you'll be able to put together when these events are supposed to happen. And they've all happened exactly. Passover happened exactly when it should have happened. And we'll get into that too. Jesus fulfilled it completely. We talked last week about the seventh month being the first, and the first month being the seventh. It was the Passover. It was also the Day of Atonement. Um, for the Jewish revelation or um, generation. So anyway, we looked at all these numbers, and I'm just trying to explain that that these are if we never knew nothing but the 1656 years and the pattern that Moses was given, and we were asked to rehearse that pattern, and we were asked, because each day is supposed to be rehearsal for preaching, we would expect things to happen exactly as they happened, exactly on those timelines. And there's no book written anywhere ever that is prophetic like that. There's no. Anyway, I'm going to just go to the next slide here. So we were told when I looked up, the difference between a law and a theory and a hypothesis, I was kind of interested. The first thing it said is we were not given a manual for where we came from or how everything works. So therefore, we have created our observations of laws, theories, hypothesis. I thought, yeah, we were given a manual. You just don't want to read it. We were given a manual of exactly how it works, everything. So anyway, so for example, and we've talked about some things past. So the difference between a law and a theory and a hypothesis. So there's a law of biogenesis that states unequivocally that life creates life, that life can only come from pre-existing life or other living things, and not from non-living matter. So that was for 2,000 years, from Aristotle until Louis Pasteur, they believed in spontaneous creation, that fleas, maggots, other things were spontaneous life. They just appeared on meat and on, etc. And they really did. It was a scientific theory, as a matter of fact. But Louis Pasteur proved that life cannot come from non-life. He very simple experimentation where, with meat, he sealed it off so no flies could land on it, and no life came out of it. With water, sealed that off so that bacteria couldn't, life couldn't be introduced into it. Long story short, that is the foundational law for biology. It's the foundational life for biology. And it was introduced five years after the theory of evolution. I remember Darwin's book, said the origin of the species. Yeah, it showed 5 years after that only life begets life. So biology, progressed and everything from there. But now you have a hypothesis of abiogenesis. Well, abiogenesis is the opposite. It says that life arose from non-living matter. So, and that's, we just go backwards in this confusion. Okay, on one hand, we have a scientific law that says only life can life can only come from life. And then we have these people working like crazy to try and say, no, life can come from non-life. We can't prove it. We have a bunch of hypotheses. That's all a bunch of confusion. And I'm mentioned to you earlier that there is a law. So law is a model of observed phenomena. In this ark, which there is the ark, the law of the covenant right inside here. There's a law, God's covenant. And everything given about these observations is the explanation, the theory. So there is a law, there is a theory better than any explanation out there if we're just willing to observe it. And laws usually come with mathematical proof and stuff like that. And laws usually come with predictions. Well, I predict this will happen here. I predict this law predicts this will happen at this time. There's nothing more incredible when we start to get into it that of this law, of this thing presented in the covenant code, to say that God is really who he says he is. He really is the supernatural creator, redeemer, that things happen on his order and his timeline. They'll continue to happen on his timeline. And that what is all this about? It's to point us to the Bible and point us to which points us to Jesus and to which points us to God, But times that we're living in, these times of babble or confusion, try and obscure those things. And when you obscure it so you can't recognize it, obscure this pattern. So when they say things like the different people didn't write the books at the different times, or there's other theories of how life arose, or how it evolved, or whatever. It just tries to obscure this pattern, this manual. And I believe that this instruction given from Jesus in the book of Revelation to go back and study this pattern, this unobstructed, this unobscured, this pure pattern from God, and all of the days and all of the ways that are meant to observe it, is an incredible blessing for our generation to see that this really is, and we talked about it a little bit before, that this pattern ends in our generation. In fact, in the next couple of years would be the very last cycle of the very last stone of that tabernacle gets placed now. If you took each stone to be 69 years, like we went through some of these numbers before, 69 and everything, then that capstone is virtually like we've passed the 6,000 years. We've passed the 6. We're into the 7th. We're very early into the 7th, but we're right at the 7th day. We're exactly at where all those times I showed you when those things happen, the 621, the 1035, the 1656, the 2484, the 2140, they're all 1.15. And we're right at that time right now in history. That capstone is being laid. And so for us to understand that and be able to observe it, so the point of this whole covenant code isn't to do like a one-off presentation, going to get everything in one shot, but it's to continue to look at every single event in the Bible based on this timeline and based on God's word, and see that it was all foretold from the beginning, that we were going to look at, things that happened from Jesus till now with the Roman Empire and blah, 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 and see that it all happens in the same pattern right up until today. To know that God, like at a time when faith is the lowest, when you just go, you do a Google search and you have everything, every attack on the Bible that you could possibly have, wasn't written when it said it was written, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all such meager, beggarly theories, all unproven and all easy to disprove. But it's a waste of time, because the best way to see if the word of God is true is to let it speak for itself. you should expect, if it's the word of God, that there will be supernatural evidence of its truth. Prophecy is supernatural evidence of its truth. But prophecy has almost been ruined, almost been totally wiped out by these lies and like, for example, when they say, well, later people came along and made it look prophetic. Wrote in for the earlier prophets, make it look like the earlier. Well, it's amazing that that's just that they have this theory out there. But we also have 20,000 manuscript evidence, and not one of them is the older one not have the prophecy and the newer one have it. So where do they go out and destroy every copy that was out there for hundreds of years before they, before they changed it? Like it just doesn't make any sense, So the easiest thing to do is let the word of God speak for itself, and understand that like I said, hopefully when we looked at some of these numbers, today, to see how, look at these numbers. These are all these dimensions from the ark, the most holy thing in the whole tabernacle pattern. The man's whole redemption is based on this event, and it can only be done by the high priest on the Day of Atonement, the most holy day of the year. And what are those dimensions? And those dimensions were given. We didn't make them up. We're just observing them. Just like when we observe time, we can't make it up. We can just observe it. We can't change how many degrees the Earth rotates in 24 hours. We can just observe it. And when we make these observations, this is what we find. These charts here are nothing but observations, but they're pretty incredible observations. And they're observations that no one's spoken about before. They haven't looked at it in this way before. And I'm doing this for free. I'm not, I have nothing more than any of you have. Not a pastor. I'm a sinner. I'm just showing you what I began to see, and what, and the whole purpose is for you to be able to take this yourself, study yourself, take it, it's not for me to hoard. It's just say, look, here's these observations, and here's something we can share with each other. And, I was talking before we went on, I'm open to receiving things too. Oh, I got a better picture of the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah, send it to me. Let me use it, because I'm not, so anyway, so that's took up 45 minutes of our time. It is a question and answer, but I wanted to focus on those 5 slides that we just did and open it up to some questions, if you'd like, for the next 10 minutes or so.
Brent, I have a quick question just to clarify, because I don't know what my brain's seeing, but you have Moses Exodus.
What's that?
You have on that chart Ark of Noah and then Moses Exodus, and then he was born? That didn't make sense.
No, it's hard when you try and fit things into a little chart here.
Okay.
So
it looked like they all went with the arrows, and I was like, wait a minute.
this is when he was born, and so this is kind of the mercy timeline from here, because I got to show the 931 years till his time. I could write Moses here in Exodus, but it just, so to clarify, that's when he was born. Just like that's, that many years passed before he was born.
Okay, but it was really at the beginning of that yellow one? The Moses Exodus, he was born at the beginning of that one?
This is when he was born. The Exodus came here. So I could.
What's Moses Exodus?
What's that?
What is Moses?
Exodus is the book of Exodus rather than his flight from Egypt.
It's both. It's like 80 years after his birth was the Exodus.
Okay.
And
that next line doesn't go with it at all.
What's that?
Okay. The next line doesn't go with it at all. You said
what
mercy starts, but it can't, because Moses Exodus is before the mercy timeline. So he had to have already been born.
Okay.
So those 2 lines don't go together.
You're just looking at it in a different way. I'm trying to because this is when the covenant was, so this whole thing is the ark timeline. This whole thing is the mercy time. So I was just highlighting this yellow and yellow to make it easier to see 621. This is 1.5 times 931. Then, so I'll clean up some things to make it,
What
easier to
happened during
understand.
Moses' Exodus?
What's that?
What happened during Moses' Exodus? That little timeline, what happened?
If you look just below that, it says Adam at creation to birth of Moses. And that
Exactly.
arrow goes to that where that blue line
Yeah.
starts. So that's the birth of Moses there.
I
See-
understand that, but what is Moses' Exodus? That sounds like when Moses was already alive, but obviously it's not.
Okay. So
It's-
just forget it, Sandy. It's not like I said, when you up here at the very top, Adam at creation to Ark of Noah, 1656 years. Ark of Noah's ministry of Jesus, 2,484 years. Then you have the little breakdown here. Adam, to Enoch, from Enoch to Noah, which is the Ark of Noah, which is the flood. From then till the birth of Moses, from Moses to Elijah, from Elijah to the ministry of Jesus. And then below here, 2,587.5 to the birth of Moses, the 1552.5 till the ministry of Jesus or baptism of Jesus, total length of time 4140. So, like I said, I just create these things myself, like the day before, do whatever, and just try and use them, for explanations. But this was, it's like this says Enoch the seventh. Well, he wasn't born over here; he was born there, right here. That's many years past. But where do I put this in? Where do I put, I mean, it gets too convoluted, So I'm adding, we've got Adam, we've got Enoch, we've got Noah, we've got Moses, we've got Elijah, we've got Jesus. And I'm just trying to show that these things happen according to the same timeline, according to this, 0.15, 1.5, 2.5, 2.25. So anyway, the simple answer is we're going to be actually getting into, for example, this period right here, which is before Moses, which is the patriarchs. We're going to be getting into the 300 between Abraham and Joseph, and it's very prophetic, So these timelines are going to change anyway, and that's why I said to you earlier on, to have these done up in a book and have them organized properly is going to be a lot easier, I have them, separated out, specifically in the timelines, and I think it's probably back here. You've seen them before, but so I think I have probably in here.
Well, that's okay. Everybody else seemed to understand it. I was just looking at the names, but
No, any feedback is good because it helps me improve things moving forward. But
Okay, Brett,
yeah,
I got another perspective for you. Bear with me. Don't start stoning me yet. The rotating earth is not found in the Bible. However, you can find in the Bible that the earth is a circle, which is 360 degrees,
right,
and the sun was put in its course, which is 24 hours.
right.
So your figures are all still there. It's just you can't I don't think you can find the rotating earth in the Bible. That's a man-made theory, for lack of a better word.
What you'd find in the Bible is day 4 of creation,
Correct.
where it says the observation of the sun, the moon, the celestial bodies is for time and for seasons,
Right.
and for and measuring holy days, etc. So we were taught to measure time. God encourages us to
We
measure
meet up
time,
at Ate Helen's house. Cause I'm gonna do her,
You're here.
yeah.
but we were
Yeah, where is
encouraged. We were encouraged to measure
It's
time.
Sunday.
Can you go and do that and then pick me up on the way?
What? Keith, your
Keith?
volume's on.
Yeah, okay.
Keith,
Um,
anyway,
He's muted now. Go ahead.
so George,
Yeah.
we were encouraged on like what we have to do. So we'd say, okay, how did God tell us to observe days? Well, in the fourth day of creation, he
Sun
tells
and
us
the
to
moon.
observe literal days, right?
Sun
Observe.
and the moon.
Okay,
That's your
so
measurement.
right,
And the seasons, but that's,
right.
yeah.
So that's where we get this rotation of the earth and
But
blah
there's
blah
no
blah.
rotation there. That's just, you don't have it saying, the earth began to rotate. When did it actually rotate? On day 4?
It it
I mean,
doesn't
because
matter.
you didn't, the sun wasn't created till day 4. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
whole different
Yeah.
object. Like I said, the
Let-
Bible does support your figures. It's just in a different way.
Yeah,
Like I
And
said,
you-
if you
and
if you
my
use
main
it,
point. So my main point is we're told to observe days in a couple of different ways. We were told to observe the celestial bodies to learn to measure time. But then we were told to observe days, for example, the Sabbath day, which was the seventh day and had nothing to do with the celestial bodies. It was every seventh day, you know. Then we were told to measure, like we were told things like a day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years like a day. And we were given, and when we combine these, so that's where we think, well, the pattern of creation is, prophetic, and that's why people look for events to happen on the sixth day or the seventh day. So all of these things are biblical out of how did God tell us to observe time? But the most important thing is that the difference between like all man has finally agreed to the observance of time. So whether it's religious, non-religious, like secular, man's now finally in agreement that yeah, there's like for example, there's not 24 hours in a day.
right,
I mean,
it's a little bit more.
it averages over a year to be 24 hours a day.
Right.
But it's slightly more, slightly less, but it averages 24 hours a day. And man agrees on that. And so, but what man doesn't agree on, so that's an observation that all man made. Observing the seventh day, which is, a day given in the Bible to observe, or any of the feast days or anything else, not everyone agrees on that. But God said, observe this day. So when I'm looking at, these timelines, that we just looked at or whatever, um, it doesn't, surprise me. In fact, it encourages me that these things happen on the 6.9th tick of the clock.
I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying you can support it from the
Right.
Bible only.
I got you.
Yeah,
I got you.
I
I
mean, it's
understand
there.
that, and I
It's
appreciate it.
obvious. It's very
Yeah.
obvious.
There's a place in the Old Testament where it says that the time stopped. The sun stopped in the sky,
Right.
and that's because they thought at that time, to me, according to what I believe, is that the sun went around the earth, not the earth went around the sun. We understand that today, that it was the earth that stopped the rotation.
Nope.
So,
So it stopped rotating for 10 hours.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
No.
oh my goodness. Do you know the chaos that would ensue if that were the theory?
Okay,
Well,
Often happen.
Proven.
Yeah.
If the
Let's
sun is
move on.
stationary,
God knows more than any of us. Whether the earth is round or flat or spherical, it doesn't matter. God knows the truth. He knows more than we do. We need to keep our pride to ourselves and move on.
okay, Brent, thank you
well,
very much. I appreciate that.
Time's up, I guess.
yeah, I'm trying to show you the covenant code, the pattern of the tabernacle, and the things that I can pull directly out of the Bible. And that's my mission, to share, to follow the instructions of Revelation, to go back and look at this tabernacle pattern. And I think, like I said, we looked today at the 1656 years, and we looked today at the dimensions of the ark, and that's all we used. was just measure time, the dimensions, and the genealogy, and we still see these exact numbers that we looked at before. For 8 hours, we made these observations of, and we see that they're all related, and hopefully, that promotes an amen somewhere, So anyway,
It's
I'll stop the sharing on
exciting.
here.
It shows that we're nearing the end. I have a quick question. And this is just me, just curious. You had thought that 1888 was 6,000 years? Or about there?
Yeah, actually around
And-
eight. Go ahead.
And Mrs. White had said something about he could have come,
Mhm.
but it would it wouldn't have been to the cap thing like it is now.
Right.
So, but God would have known, or is it really he couldn't have, or God would have just done it early?
Well,
I mean, we don't know.
I think both, but because I think any time after that was the seventh, so you could come
Yeah.
anytime.
Even though it wasn't finished, it wouldn't matter.
There's
but yeah.
actually, the actual where it hit 6,000 years was actually 1886. So anytime after 1886, so
Okay.
1887, but you'll see, for example, with Enoch, he was actually born in 622, but 621 years passed before,
Right.
the flood, 1656. But it was the second month, the 46th day of that it happened. So it always happens a little bit past past the sixth or whatever. So the exact 6,000 year would be 1886. 6,001 year, the start of the seventh would be 1887.
That's exciting though.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and put this, well, I'm gonna go stop the YouTube and start it up, so
Yeah.
everybody on, and all of you on YouTube, just come back on.